So we're going to first start off with the first requirement for the traffic safety merit badge. During this session, you're going to learn mistakes that new drivers frequently make, what you are required by law to carry with you whenever you operate a motor vehicle, how alcohol and other drugs affect the human body and impacts on driving, what the legal blood concentration and consequences for driving while intoxicated or driving under the influence are, what the open container laws are. You're also going to learn factors to be considered in the design of roadways, how roadside hazards and road conditions contribute to the occurrence and serious traffic crashes, effects of fatigue or distraction on motor vehicle operation, common distractions and how driver distractions contribute to traffic accidents, methods to minimize distractions, and how to plan to be alert when transporting other people. So that's a lot of stuff that we're going to cover in this first section. So this first section is going to be one of the longer ones that we do as part of this merit badge, but those are the things we're going to learn. What you'll see on there is that there's a letter after each of those, which kind of gives you an indication of which part it is. So this, the first one on factors to be considered in the design of road or highway is 1C. So when we get to 1C, that'll be indicated by 1C in your workbook. So that'll be up in the upper left-hand corner of the screen as we go through them in terms of what requirement it is we're talking about. So I will trust that you guys will be able to keep up as we go along. So the first thing we're going to talk about is top mistakes that new drivers frequently make. So one of the things we look at is when we look at deaths for teenagers, motor vehicles make up 35% of the deaths associated with teenagers. And so it's one of the riskier things that teenagers do is being in a motor vehicle. And so that is a significant portion. Over a third of the deaths of teenagers are associated with motor vehicle crashes.
What's homicide?
So the question is, what is a homicide? And in this case, a homicide is when somebody else kills you intentionally. So you're twice as likely to die in a motor vehicle crash than you are to die in a homicide. So the merit badge pamphlet details a series of top mistakes that new drivers make. And so one of those is overconfidence. When we look at young men, 3/4 of them, 75%, think that they are better than the average driver. And if you understand statistics, average is the middle. So half are better, half are worse. And so when people think that they're better than average and 3/4 of the people think they're better than average, it's not possible because the average is at 50%. And so what that means is that people think that they're better than what they actually are. And for women, or young women, that's 67%. So young men are more likely to think they're better drivers than what young women are. But young people in general are more likely to think that they're an above average driver. So overconfidence plays an important role in that. Not buckling up. And so we've got a little video here. We're going to play with this. But not buckling up is a serious concern with young people. They don't like to be constrained. So buckling up is important. A lot of people don't think they need to do it, particularly if they sit in the back seat. But even as an adult, you need to buckle up when you're driving in a car. It significantly reduces your likelihood of being injured or killed. But teenagers in general are less likely to buckle up. Speeding is also another common thing. Young adults tend to drive faster than older adults. And so we're much more likely to see speeding coming from young drivers. And that's a common mistake that new drivers make, is driving faster than what they ought to. Rowdy passengers. That is a big challenge. And so when we look at the risk of death with youth passengers, when we see 2 passengers in the vehicle, there's twice the likelihood that those individuals are going to be involved in a fatal crash. If there's 3 passengers, it's 4 times as likely. If you're in the car with your parent, you're much less likely to be involved in a fatal crash. So 62% less likely if you're driving with a parent. So this is one of the struggles when you guys learn to drive, is that as you learn, you're oftentimes with a parent and they keep you under control. And then you get off on your own and you You have your friends with you, and you take risks that you otherwise wouldn't take. Did I see a question?
How do they measure like how risky it is to be with other people?
So the question is, how do they measure how risky it is to be with other people? And so there's been studies that have been done that have looked at this. Some of it's done through a meta-analysis that looks at crash rates and fatalities. Others have been simpler studies where they look at just speed choices with passengers there. We see behaviors that indicate more reckless driving. And so for this, I don't remember the exact methodology, but AAA Foundation did the study where they tried to tease out what the effects were of passengers, and they looked at where they were overrepresented, and your likelihood of being involved in fatal crashes increased based on the number of passengers that were present.
What is that?
So here's another one, using cell phones. And so here's an example of a teen driver using their cell phone. Whoops. So as we can see, using your cell phone while driving is not a great idea. It takes your eyes off the road, takes your mind off the road, and bad things happen, whether it's by you drifting off the roadway or the things around you changing and you not notice it. So cell phone use is not a great idea, and encourage you not to do so. CD, MP3 radio, so messing around with the radio and adjusting, same rationale. If your eyes aren't on the road, you are having a harder time paying attention to what's going on. It's not so much listening to the music as it is making those adjustments. When your eyes are off the road, things change and you miss them. Late night cruising. So this is, one of the challenges when you're out at night is that it's dark and you can't see as far. Your headlights don't necessarily go as far as you'd like, and so when you're out late at night driving, you're A, more likely to be tired, B, you can't see as far, and so you're also likely to have your friends in the car with you. And so that's all these combinations in terms of late night cruising, and so this is an area where new drivers often make mistakes. And drinking and driving.
Oh, I'm expecting that to be higher.
Well, they're not ranked in terms of importance. They're ranked in terms of how they occur. So, as I said, drinking and driving accounts for about 60% of teenage fatalities. Next up is bad situations. I couldn't find a great graphic for this one, but this one seems appropriate. Sometimes young drivers get in situations that they just shouldn't. And making those choices about what you're going to do, who you're going to hang out with, and where you're going to go is a big choice. And sometimes those choices about just getting in the car is that choice. And then taking risks. One thing we know about young people in general is that they tend to take more risks than older individuals, and so much more likely to take a risk, much more likely to do things that older drivers would not, particularly as they're learning to drive. They may put themselves in situations that they maybe shouldn't. Driving when they know they're tired, driving when they know that getting in a car when the person that they're riding with has been drinking, and making those choices are all things that can lead to bad outcomes. So that's the list from your merit badge pamphlet. There are other lists of frequently made mistakes. AAA says that poor visual scanning, speeding, and distraction are the leading causes. One of the things we know with younger drivers is that you've got a big road going on, and so sometimes you're not looking where you should be. So you might be only looking straight ahead, and you might miss the car coming in from the side or the bike coming in from the side. And so learning to scan is something that takes a while to do. But there's a long list of these. Cars.com has a list that they keep updated over time as well. They include distracted behind the wheel, taking too many risks, speeding, overcrowding the car, driving under the influence, following too closely, so getting too close to the car in front of you so you don't have enough time to respond, driving unbuckled, not being able to handle emergencies, driving while drowsy, or choosing the wrong car and not maintaining it. And that's some people get a car that's more powerful than what they can control, and then they get into a situation where they're not able to avoid a crash. So the next one we're going to talk about is items you must carry when you're driving. So that's the next thing on our list. So, yep. So I've heard insurance card is one of them. What else do we think might be in there?
Driver's license.
Driver's license is another one.
Car keys.
Car keys is not one of them. You do need that to operate the car, but you're not legally required to have it if your car magically doesn't require it. So what we've got is your license. Your vehicle registration is the other one.
Oh, yeah.
And then proof of insurance. So those are the things you need. Your license, vehicle registration, and proof of insurance.
I was gonna say you. So what? The car won't move without something.
Vehicle registration, proof of insurance, and your license are the three things you have to carry with you when you're driving. Okay?
Vehicle registration is proof that it's actually your car.
So next up, we're going to move on to 1B. And we're going to talk about the effects of alcohol and other drugs. Vaughn, you may have to get it from your neighbor. So, effects of alcohol and other drugs. And so, there's two different types of things that happen with your body. They can be classified into stimulants and depressants. And so, we're going to start with depressants. Depressants slow the signals between your body and your brain. So they basically make you go slower. They're things that make you tired. And because your body is operating, your nervous system is operating more slowly, it has a variety of things that happen to you. But basically, it means that you can't respond to danger quickly. And so when you're on a depressant, if something unexpected happens, you're not able to respond to it as quickly as you otherwise would. And so on the other side, we've got stimulants. And stimulants can do some quirky things with your body, one of which is they send off extra signals which can confuse your body. And so your heart is beating faster, your blood vessels are more constricted. But at the end of the day, what it means when we're talking about driving is that if stress occurs, your body might not be able to respond as quickly or at all. So it may get confused and it may just not respond when you want to. And so when you get that emergency response, it doesn't necessarily get translated in terms of your body being able to respond. So those are some of the effects of alcohol and other drugs on your body. Question?
So for B, we're supposed to write describe how the alcohol and the drugs. This is for this.
Yep. So alcohol is a complicated one because when you're drinking, it serves kind of as a stimulant role. So as your blood alcohol level is increasing, it acts more as a stimulant. Once you reach your peak and you start to decline, it becomes a depressant. And so you get a little bit of both of these. The stimulant phase for alcohol is much shorter than the depressant phase. So for people who've been out drinking, after they reach their peak, they just kind of get tired and they're more lethargic, slower to respond. And so we'll have a little bit more on the next slide about these as well. So in general, we've talked a little bit about the fact that there's stimulants and depressants and what they do. But what we know with impaired driving is that it affects a lot of different aspects of your driving. Multitasking. So when you're impaired, you're less able to do multiple things. So when we talked about tuning the radio and driving, that's multitasking. You're trying to keep the vehicle straight while also adjusting the radio station or the volume or whatever it is you're doing in terms of searching for a song. That is impaired. Reaction time is generally slowed when you're impaired. So we know that you're not able to respond as quickly. So if the vehicle in front slams on its brakes, it takes a little bit longer to hit the brakes to avoid that crash. Tracking is also impaired. Your ability to look at what's going on in the environment and predict when something bad is going to happen. Comprehension, understanding the situation that you're in. You may miss cues in the driving environment. Your attention span is also often impaired. You can't focus as long as you otherwise might. Your coordination, your ability to hit the brake pedal from the accelerator pedal. If you're impaired, you may miss the brake pedal completely. You might not be able to steer as precisely as you'd like. So, So those are some of the things that happen with impaired driving. Okay?
Basically, it's just a lot of bad things happening all at once, which leads to a not good outcome.
Correct. So when you are impaired, and that impairment can come from drugs or alcohol or even other things like drowsiness, which we'll talk about later. But not all drugs have effects in all these areas. Alcohol has effects across most of these areas, and which makes it particularly bad. Which is why there's such a focus on preventing alcohol-involved crashes and drunk driving. But yes, these things are all bad individually. When you combine them all together, it makes for a deadly situation.
And trust me, guys, multitasking is very important on track.
So the next one we're going to talk about is legal blood concentration. So what state do we live in? Here in Iowa, we are in this category here. And so zero tolerance level in Iowa is 0.02% BAC, which is what it is in most of the country. Zero tolerance level is what young drivers fall under, those that are under age 21. If you're driving a vehicle and you're not of legal drinking age, if you're above that limit, there are enhanced penalties that kick in. And so basically it means you shouldn't drink when you're underage in particular, but if you do happen to drink, you really shouldn't drive. For most adults, the legal limit is 0.08% BAC. That's everywhere in the country except for Utah, which just recently went down to 0.05% BAC. So that is
Bad or good?
so the question is 0.05% BAC bad or good? And so it is lower than what it is in the rest of the country, which means that people will have less impairment while operating a vehicle, because if you're above 0.05 and below 0.08, you still have some level of impairment. Impairments observed starting at 0.02% in terms of driving performance. Crash risk still starts to go up at 0.05% in particular, and it goes up much faster once you get above 0.08%. So consequences of driving while impaired. License suspension. So what that means is that you could have your license taken away for a period of time. And so this graph here shows how long you might have your license taken away in years. And so it ranges from 15 days on the short end in some states all the way up to 2 years for a first offense. And so depending upon what state you're in, you could lose your license for as little as 15 days or for as long as 2 years for driving while under the influence of alcohol.
I would say if I owned a state, I would say you have to take all your driver's license and tests again.
Yeah.
That's what I would do.
And there are some states that do have requirements. You retake driver's education courses to learn about the rules. But you see there's quite a difference across the country in terms of what those levels are. Here in Iowa, it's 90 days. Another thing you can have is fines, and so those range from a few $100s to a few $1,000s. You could go to jail. So if you drive under the influence of alcohol, the judge could sentence you to jail time, even for a first offense. Most often that occurs on second or third offenses, but you could be sentenced to jail time for driving while under the influence of alcohol or driving while impaired. Even worse, well, maybe not even worse, you could wind up with your car confiscated. So in some states, they have the ability to take your car if you operate a motor vehicle while impaired. And so there's a number of states where that's not a possibility, but in more than half of them, there are circumstances under which they could confiscate your vehicle if you drive while under the influence of drugs or alcohol. The other thing that comes into place is alcohol interlocks. And so if you drive under the influence of alcohol, they could have you put a device in your car that prevents you from starting it if you have alcohol in your blood, so that you'd have to breathe into a tube, and if it detects alcohol, it wouldn't let you start your car. And so those are some of the consequences of driving while impaired. it is not a good situation. Sometimes people make mistakes and drive and don't realize that they're impaired. Most often, people are aware that they probably shouldn't drive and make that choice for one reason or the other. Sometimes that's because when you are under the influence of alcohol or drugs, you don't make good choices in general. And so you may realize you're not feeling quite right, but you still choose to get behind the wheel of the car, even though under normal circumstances you might be a person who wouldn't do something like that, but because you just make a bad choice. Open container laws. And so an open container law basically dictates about the rules about whether or not you can have a container of alcohol that's in your vehicle that is unsealed. And that could range from a passenger sitting in the passenger compartment with an alcoholic beverage, or driving your vehicle with an alcoholic beverage that's previously been opened and is now in your car. And so that could be, for example, if you had a bottle of whiskey that you put in the backseat of your car and you were transporting it from your house to your friend's house, but it's been opened, that is an open container. Even if you're not drinking from it or nobody's drinking from it, it is an open container. It has to be transported someplace other than the passenger compartment. So it would have to go in the trunk of your vehicle, someplace that you could not access while the vehicle's in motion. And so most states have laws that do not permit open containers. There are a handful of states, I think it's 7 or 8, that are highlighted in red there on the screen that have some circumstances under which you could have an open container in your vehicle.
It's 8 states.
Okay. We're going to move on to factors in the design of a road or highway. So we're on to 1C. So some of the things that come into play when we're doing this, we look at roadway safety features. So there's things that we can do to the road that make the road safer. We have things like rumble strips, which are designed so you know which lane when you're leaving the lane. So most of us have experienced when you get on the roadway and you're crossing the center line, or you're on the shoulder for some reason, and all of a sudden the vehicle starts to vibrate. It's because you've gone over a rumble strip. Other features include signs and markings. So signs tell us about what's going on in the environment. It may tell us that there's a no passing zone. It may tell us what the speed limit is. And so those are all things that are designed to help inform the driver of what's going on. They're things that are attached to the roadway to make things safer. The other things are markings. And so we've got roadway markings that tell us whether or not it's safe to pass. They tell us where we have to stop when we approach an intersection. Other factors we have to consider when we're designing roadways is who's going to use the road. And so we're going to design it differently if the roadway is meant to have pedestrians there. So if I'm in an urban area and I've got to deal with pedestrians, I've got to design the road to accommodate those pedestrians. There's got to be places for them to cross and for them to do so safely. But if I'm on an interstate highway and the speed limit is 70 miles an hour, I'm not expecting pedestrians or bikes to be there. And so how I design the road is a little bit different. Buses, mass transit also come into play in terms of how we design the roadway. So those are that's another factor is what the road user profile is going to look like. The other thing that's important is uniformity. Some places, I've got a colleague that's in China, and she's actually working on this for China because they have a lot of municipalities and they each have kind of their own rules. The EU is another example of this, where you have different countries who have different road markings and signs, and so as you go from one country to another or one province to another, what the road looked like would be different. So two signs could mean the exact same thing, and they could be 5 miles apart because you crossed a border. There's a thing, the Manual on Uniform Traffic Control Devices specifies how things should work in the U.S. So that when you drive from Iowa to Illinois or you drive from Arizona to California, how the roads are marked are very similar, so you don't have confusion between those environments. Roadside hazards is another thing that we have to consider when we're designing the roadway. We try to design our roads to be as safe as possible, and so you leave clear zones near the road so that people don't have increased risk. And so you know, you don't often see, except if you're in the mountains, where you're driving along and 10 feet off to your side is a sheer drop off, where if you go over there, you're going to die. And so, you know, if you look around, normally you see these flat areas around the roadway or shallow ditches, so that you can get in and out without being at serious risk. The other thing we do is we deal with breakaway signs, and so that's been a big transition over the last decade or two, where signs now are designed to collapse if you hit them, rather than them being a fixed object where injury could be greater if you hit them and they don't move. So roadside hazards are things we try to design out when we're designing the roadway. Road conditions. Depending upon where you live, the road conditions can vary greatly. If you live in an area where there's a lot of rain and snow, you're going to design your roads one way. If you're in the middle of the desert, you don't necessarily care as much about how the road is going to respond if there's snow on it. And so we have to look at what conditions they are, and that helps determine how the roads are going to be laid out as well. Maintenance. There's a joke that says, you know, there's two seasons with regard to roads. There's winter and there's a road repair season, which seems like it can be that way. Once you get to spring, there's a lot of work being done on maintenance on the roads, and so we try to design the roads to minimize the amount of maintenance. And when maintenance, the older a road gets, the more maintenance it takes. And so, you know, that's why they replace bridges sometimes. It's not that they're not functional, but the amount of time that they're closed for maintenance is problematic in terms of being able to handle the traffic volume. Cost, construction, maintenance, replacement, lifespan. How we decide how much we're going to invest in that roadway. The more I invest, I might be able to make a road that lasts longer, but I have to consider how much that extra lifespan is going to cost when I'm doing that. And so that may make a decision between, do I put asphalt down or do I put concrete down? And so there's a cost difference there, but there's also a lifespan difference. So we're going to take a deeper look at some of the factors in the design of a road or highway. So road conditions. Rain, snow, ice result in longer stopping distances. And so when we're designing the roadway, we need to keep that in mind. So if I'm likely to have rain or snow, I need to have visibility distances that allow me to have adequate distance to stop. So, you know, if I was in the desert, I might be able to put a stop sign over a rise and have it not be too far away because I've got plenty of friction to stop. But if I'm in Iowa and half the year it's either wet or snowy, I need more distance there so people can see the stop sign and stop before they get to it. Yes?
Is this for C or D?
This is for 1C.
So,
And so, yep, you'll see in the upper corner, a reminder, you'll see in the upper corner which question this is associated with. So, roadside hazards. Roadside hazards can make minor crashes, take a minor crash and make it fatal. And so, you know, if you lose control, we saw some of those videos of the teenagers who were distracted and they were driving off the road. If there had been a bridge abutment there rather than a ditch, you may be looking at a fatal crash instead of them just being embarrassed that they were caught being distracted. And so, you know, we try to avoid having bridge abutments, steep slopes, which could lead to rollovers, or the ability to cross into oncoming traffic. You see a lot more cable barriers that keep you on the interstate from driving into the oncoming traffic. And so we try to divide things up so we minimize the likelihood that those sort of crashes can occur. Next up, we've got the role of the driver. The driver is kind of the central piece to this. And so if you're not already driving, you one day will be. And the driver has three main roles generally when we think about driving: operational, and tactical, and strategic. And so we'll start with strategic, even though it's the third one on the list. That's kind of looking at, I'm here and I want to get to someplace else. So it's that planning and navigating. How am I going to get from point A to point B? And so it's that big picture of driving. Tactical is that next step down. So now I've decided how I'm going to get from point A to point B. I now need to decide which lane I'm going to be in. Where am I going to be at in that lane? Do I want to be near the center line? Do I want to be near the shoulder? How much space do I want to leave with the vehicle in front of me? And hazard avoidance. And so, those are at the higher level. And then maintaining lane position, maintaining headway, and emergency response are operational. So as the circumstances are changing, I'm going to be shifting around what I'm doing. And so as I'm adjusting the steering wheel to keep in my lane, that's an operational adjustment. As I release the accelerator or press the brakes, that's an operational mode as well. And then emergency response. Lead vehicle slams on its brakes. What do I do? That's an operational response to the driving environment. The other thing to keep in mind is the driver state, drowsy, distracted, or impaired, impacts all levels of driver control. And so if you need sufficient resources to be able to operate a vehicle safely, and oftentimes what we're talking about is attention. And you have to be able to apply that where it's needed. And when you don't focus or don't have the resources to focus, that's where problems occur. And so generally when you choose to drive drowsy, distracted, or impaired, that is when we have challenges that occur and the driver is not able to handle situations that come up, and they're more likely to be involved in a crash. And so one of the important things is for you to, when you drive, is to think about what your state is. Am I tired? Am I distracted? And make adjustments. People oftentimes will try to keep a longer following distance if they feel drowsy, or if they realize that they're a little bit distracted, so they've got more time to respond. And so we talked earlier about not following too closely. That's a decision you can make that helps mitigate or reduce the impact of these states. The problem is that generally when you make those decisions, your adjustment that you make doesn't adequately adjust for the level of impairment that you have. And so you might back off 25 feet, a couple car lengths, but what you really need to do is drive to back off 100 feet to give yourself adequate space. And so people will make an adjustment, but maybe not a big enough adjustment. So some common distractions. Interacting with one or more passengers accounts for 15% of crashes. Cell phone use accounts for 12% of crashes. Looking at something in the vehicle, 10% of crashes. Looking at something outside the vehicle, 9% of the crashes. Singing, moving to the music, 8% of the crashes. Grooming, combing your hair, putting on makeup, 6% of crashes. Reaching for an object in the car, another 6% of the crashes. So those are some of the more common distractions that occur while you're driving. Okay, so we're going to go on. So why shouldn't a driver who is fatigued or distracted operate a vehicle?
What is fatigue?
Fatigued means tired. So drowsy.
It's dangerous and many people can get killed doing it.
Okay, it's dangerous.
Because it's dangerous not only to you, but it's dangerous to the passenger.
Okay.
Eyes, like, are off the road.
Yep, so when you're distracted, your eyes are off the road.
You should probably not even be getting in the car, for one. And two, that usually means it's time for you to go to bed.
Okay, so got questions there about whether or not you should even get in the car if you're fatigued and whether or not it's time to go to bed. One of the things we know about fatigued is that you're fatigued at different points of time. There's the afternoon circadian dip where you're tired after lunch, and people get tired there, even though they're not necessarily going to go to bed and go to sleep. And then you have the overnight driving hours, and it does get complicated.
Would that mean like dizziness?
So,
Like if you're tired, you might get like a little wobbly and like dizzy, maybe. Like that could.
it could.
lead to, like,
So could it lead to dizziness? And so the answer is it might under certain circumstances. Generally, it's more likely to lead to falling asleep where you lose some orientation.
So you could probably just turn off the road right away.
So Here are some of the answers that I like to give to this. So when you're fatigued or distracted, you're more likely to miss changes in the driving environment. You're more likely to make wrong choices. You're going to more likely to have a slower response, and you're more likely to be involved in a crash. So those are some of the answers I came up with. There's a lot of other ones that can fall in there, and you guys gave some good ones. But those are some that I came up with. The most important one, obviously, I think in my mind is the first one. You're more likely to miss changes in the environment. So if your eyes aren't on the road or your attention isn't on the roadway because you're tired, you're more likely to have something happen and not notice it. Here are some of the ones that I came up with. So secrets to being alert while driving. Get plenty of sleep. So if you know you're going to be driving, make sure you get a good night's sleep. I've got a long drive coming up here later this month, and I know I will get plenty of sleep the night before because I know I've got an 8+ hour drive the next day. Take breaks on long trips. Don't drive too many hours in a row. And so you want to limit your hours. So you don't want to, even though my trip might be 12 hours, I don't want to do that all in one day. I'm going to break it into 2 pieces so that I don't get overly tired while driving. And so taking breaks periodically, there's a reason there's rest areas along the interstates, so you can take a break if you need to. Avoid using drugs or alcohol. If you're going to drive, don't be doing things that are going to impair you. Stop to eat. So that creates a break in there. It also avoids the hunger pains as you're driving along. And then avoid distractions. We had some good suggestions about how to avoid distractions in the back seat, but that also means don't be messing around on your phone. Don't be spending too much time adjusting the radio. So you want to try and avoid those distractions. So you guys came up with some good ideas, and these are just some of mine. So we're at a pause point here as we switch to requirement 2. So this is the end of requirement 1. And so there's no homework for this one. We covered all the content that you need to go over on this one, so we're in good shape there.
I'm going to go